जयो राधा माधवा जयो कुंज बिहारी जयो राधा माधवा जयो कुंज बिहारी जयो जयो गोपी जन वल्लभा जयो गिरिवरधारी जयो गिरिवरधारी जयो जयो गोपी जन वल्लभा जयो गिरिवरधारी जयो गिरिवरधारी जयो यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजनाय यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीर वनचारी वनचारी जय कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 रामा राम राम हरे हरे कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। जय जय श्री चैतन्य जयो नित्यानंदा जय अद्वैत चंद्र जयो गौर भक्त वृंदा जय जय श्री चैतन्य जयो नित्यानंदा जय अद्वैत चंद्र जयो गौर भक्त वृंदा Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jayo Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jayo Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So today we are reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 17, verse number 17. So you can repeat after me. Tabi sachi dekhila Rama Krishna dui bhai Tabe nistarila Prabhu jagai madhai Tabe sachi dekhila Rama Krishna dui bhai Tabe nistarila Prabhu jagai madhai Tabe sachi dekhila Rama Krishna dui bhai Tabe nistarila Prabhu jagai madhai. If anyone else would like to recite the verse. Tabe sachi dekhila Rama Krishna dui bhai Tabe nistarila Prabhu jagai madhai Tabe sachi dekhila Rama Krishna dui bhai Tabe nistarila Prabhu jagai madhai. Okay, so we'll read the word-to-word meaning. Tabe, thereafter. Shachi, Mother Shachi Devi. Dekhila, saw. Rama Krishna, Lord Rama and Lord Balarama. Dui Bhai, two brothers. Tabe, thereafter. Nistarila, delivered. Prabhu, the Lord. Jagai Madhai, the true brothers Jagai and Madhai. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Thereafter, Mother Sachi Devi saw the brothers Krishna and Balram in their manifestations of Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda. Then the Lord delivered the two brothers Jagai and Madhai. Purport. One night Shachi Devi dreamt that the deities in her house, Krishna and Balram, had taken the forms of Chaitanya and Nityananda and were fighting one another, as children do, to eat the Naivedya or offering to the deities. On the next day, by the will of Lord Chaitanya, Shachi Devi invited Nityananda to take prasada at her house. Thus Vishwambara, Lord Chaitanya, and Nityananda were eating together, and Shachi Devi realized that they were none other than Krishna and Balram. Seeing this, she fainted. Jagai and Madhai were two brothers born in Navadvipa in a respectable Brahmana family who later became addicted to all kinds of sinful activities. By the order of Lord Chaitanya, both Nityananda Prabhu and Haridas Thakur used to preach the cult of Krishna consciousness door to door. In the course of such preaching, they found Jagai and Madhai, two maddened, drunkard brothers, who upon seeing them began to chase them. On the next day, Madhai struck Nityananda Prabhu on the head with a piece of earthen pot, thus drawing blood. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu heard of this, he immediately came to the spot, ready to punish both brothers. But when the all-merciful Lord Gauranga saw Jagai's repentant behavior, he immediately embraced him. By seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face, embracing him, both the sinful brothers were at once cleansed. Thus they received initiation into the chanting of Hare Krishna Mahamantra from the Lord and were delivered. Om Ajnanatimmirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Gutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sakana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Mitamscha हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीन बंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छा कल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लांघयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारणं नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वती देवी गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So in this verse we're seeing quite a contrast between two different brothers. So the first pair we see is Krishna and Rama, essentially in the form of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. And the other, on the other hand, we see the two brothers Jagai and Madhai, who were completely on the opposite spectrum. So it's quite interesting that this verse contrasts both brothers together. Now, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda are nothing but essentially the manifestation of mercy, the Lord's mercy pouring unconditionally towards all the living entities. And Jagai and Madhai are essentially the personification of all kinds of sinful activities that one can perform in this material universe. But essentially what is shown is that, you know, whenever there is a conflict of evil and the Supreme Lord, or good essentially, it is that evil cannot last for much longer, because wherever the Supreme Lord is present, over there darkness is dispelled. Now this is quite in contradiction to some of the Abrahamic religions, for example, where they present God as being in constant competition with Satan, where Satan is eternal, and I mean not completely eternal, because he also was, according to their philosophy, he was born, but essentially he will remain until the end of time, and God is in constant competition with him, he doesn't want the Jivatmas to go towards him, but he can't do anything about it, etc. Whereas in the broader Brihad, or broader understanding of the Vaishnava tradition, we understand that essentially, I think Bhaktivinoda Thakur equates Satan to being none other than Kali himself, like the personification of Kali. So he says that, well, Kali will eventually subside, and then the mode of goodness will again reinstate, which is when the first Yuga, Satya Yuga, comes back. So essentially, we don't see Satan or Kali as being eternal in that sense. But the sinful propensity is always there within human beings, which is represented by these two brothers, Jagai and Madhai. Now, I know Srila Prabhupada was very much against us, personifying, not personifying, but depersonifying different personalities. Like he was against, like in the Srimad Bhagavatam and in Bhagavad Gita, we often read that Srila Prabhupada was very much against the philosophers on and the commentators on Bhagavad Gita calling the five Pandavas as five senses, and Krishna as being the mind, and the mind is meant to control the senses, etc. Srila Prabhupada was very much against the depersonification of the characters in the pastimes of the Lord. And there is a strong reason for this. It's because that these are real personalities. These are not just representations of something, but they are real personalities also. So similarly, even though I tried to depersonify them, it was just an attempt to bring an idea. It's not to essentially show that these are Jagai and Madhai were not real personalities, but actually they are real personalities. But it's contrasting the fact that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami mentions them in this two verse, both of them in the same verse, is to point the fact out that there is quite a different contrast between both these personalities. Now it's quite interesting to see that the way in which Jagai and Madhai were delivered, actually this whole pastime is not discussed in Chaitanya Charitamrita in very much detail. It's mostly discussed in Vrindavan Das Thakur's Chaitanya Bhagavat, where it's described in a lot of detail. But the philosophical points are discussed here in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Essentially, it goes to point out, Srila Prabhupada has often referred to this example to point out that the devotee is always prepared to take risks in the service of Krishna, especially in preaching Krishna consciousness. Now, when we're preaching Krishna consciousness, there will be lots of different obstacles. especially from the atheists, from the Mayavadis, and from the Nirvisheshvadis. So Nirvisheshvadis are nothing but the Buddhists, and Mayavadis, you just have to turn in any direction in India and you'll see a Mayavadi anywhere. They're pretty much like rampant all across India. And nowadays they're becoming rampant in the Western world also. Like recently when we were driving from Gold Coast, we just saw that there is the ashrama of a very well-known Mayavadi saint, like quite next to this farming community here, which was quite disheartening to see that, there's Mayavadis being spread everywhere. But eventually, if we continue to preach the message of Krishna consciousness, then eventually all of these forces will be overcome as well, as per the prediction of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada as well. So the way we can preach Krishna consciousness is we can preach Krishna consciousness by explaining the nature of the Lord himself. So that's why this verse essentially talks about both the different brothers. So it talks about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityanand Prabhu, and also Jagai and Madhai. So on one hand, we can not criticize, so to speak, but point out the faults of Jagai and Madhai. And on the other hand, we can glorify the Lord himself also. So we can glorify Lord Krishna and Balaram, and also Lord Nityananda and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also. So the relationship between Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda is quite interesting. And that is something that is worthy of discussion. Because essentially we see that throughout their three incarnations, you could say, or three different appearances, they are almost inseparable. Like we see that Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, they're pretty much inseparable since they met. If we go back to their previous manifestation, which was as Krishna and Balaram, again they were almost inseparable since beginning, since they appeared in this earth, and then when they disappeared. And also, if we look at the pastimes of Lord Ram and Lakshmana, again they were very much inseparable. Like you could not separate them. Now it's quite interesting because they both are the same personality. They are both essentially the supreme personality of Godhead. But somehow or the other, they are also quite different to each other. Their moods are completely different, and their nature also appears to be completely different. Now, one of the interesting things is when Krishna showed Mother Yashoda the universal form in his mouth, it was assumed that, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and no one else can be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But actually, if you read the Srimad Bhagavatam, you will see that in the 10th canto, Lord Balaram also showed the universal manifestation. He also showed how he is the Paramatma pervading into all of these different places. Now, one may become confused, who is supreme? Is it Krishna or Balaram? But actually, the devotees, they don't see any difference between Krishna and Balaram. Especially if we look at it from a perspective of tattva, or from the perspective of their spiritual substance. So spiritually, they are ultimately the same person. Or ontologically, you could say. Ontologically, they're the same person. But in the rasa, or in the mellow, they are completely different. Like Lord Krishna is in the form of enjoying, as the form of Prabhu, as the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whereas Balaram is in the form, even though he is in the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he's also in the form of a servant, which is the dearmost servant of Krishna. So, or in fact, you could say the very first servant of Krishna also. So this is quite interesting. So if we take this conversation back all the way to when Lord Ram appeared, you will see how Lord Ram and Lord Lakshman were completely inseparable. So Rama is essentially none other than Lord Krishna, and Lakshman is none other than Anantasesh, who is Lord Balaram. So if you go back all the way to Lord Ram's Leela, we will see that, Lord Ram, when he was born, so as we will be celebrating the appearance day of Lord Ram here also in April, he appeared in the Punarvasu Nakshatra on the 9th day of the Chaitra month. Whereas Lakshmana appeared on the 10th day under the Aslesha star and within the Chaitra month as well. So they appeared one day after each other. And actually Ram was born to Kaushalya, and Lakshmana was born to Sumitra. He was born with another child who was known as Shatrughna. So these two were born as twins, whereas Lord Ram was born to Kaushalya as a single child. But we see that from his birth, Lakshmana was not very much attached to his twin brother Shatrughna. He was more attached to Lord Ram. In fact, there is a very common saying that when the mothers would keep the four children to sleep, they would continuously keep crying because they would be putting each child in a single cradle. But then what they noticed is that if you put Lakshmana with Ram and then if you put Bharata with Shatrughna, they noticed that the crying would immediately stop, that all the four children would be completely satisfied. So we can see from the early past times that Lord Ram and Lord Lakshmana were completely attached to each other. Now when they were growing up, essentially we see that sage Vishwamitra comes to take Lord Ram to the forest. He says that I want Lord Ram to kill the demon known as Tadaka, because she is disrupting the sacrifices of the sages by throwing all kinds of inauspicious stuff into the sacrificial fire. So then at that time, Dashrath, with a very heavy heart, he lets Lord Ram go. But along with Ram goes Lakshmana. Not his elder brother who is Bharata, but Lakshmana goes along with Lord Ram. Then they, kill the demoness Tadaka. They banish Maricha into the forest like 800 miles away. And then they go and they attend the sacrifice of Janak Maharaj together. So they attend the sacrifice of Janak Maharaj together. And over there, Lord Ram breaks the bow of Shiva as well. And basically after that happens, they both get married together. So Lord Rama, he marries Sita, and Lakshmana, he marries Urmila. That description is also there. And then we see that when they come back to Ayodhya and when Lord Ram is about to be coronated, then at that time, due to some unfortunate circumstances, it was decided that Ram has to go to the forest for 14 years. At that time, the first person who finds out about the fact that Lord Ram is going to go to the forest is none other than Lakshmana, because he was just outside the room where the decision was made. So while he was standing outside, he was becoming very distressed. He was almost, it's described, he was hissing like a snake. His eyes were completely red with anger. He was completely very fierce. And when Lord Ram comes outside, his limbs are trembling. He's getting very angry. And he looks at Lord Ram and he says that, there is no way that you are not becoming the king. He says, I cannot tolerate seeing anyone else becoming the king except for you. You're the only one who deserves to be the king. He says, who is the one who's stopping your coronation? He says, I want to see who's stopping your coronation. He says, is it our father, Dashrath? Is it our mother, Kekai? He says, they are nothing in front of me. With the might of my arms, I will kill each and every one of them. So he's ready to kill even his own father. Lakshman is ready to kill his own father if that father is being an obstruction in coronating Lord Ram as the king. So he becomes very, very angry, ready to essentially slaughter both of them. He says, I'm ready to kill the whole army of Dashrath. I don't care about anyone. He says, I'm ready to kill everyone. Then Lord Ram calms him down and he says that, look, I have to follow the dharma of obeying my father, so that's why I have to go to the forest, etc. So he convinces him, and then Lakshmana says, well, if you are going to go to the forest, I'm also going to go to the forest. So Rama tries to argue with him. He says, no, well, I don't think you should come to the forest because our father here might need some support and my mother might need some support. Kaushalya will need some support, so you should provide support. And then he's like, no, I'm not going to provide any support. He's like, my wife will be here. Urmila will stay here. She will look after my mother. With regards to your father, he said, that's not my father anymore. From this day onwards, I don't consider him to be my father. So I don't really care about him at all. If he wants to die, he can die. Otherwise, I'll kill him with my own hands, he says. So then Lord Ram has no other option but to take Lakshmana with him to the forest. And then we obviously know that Sita also decides to come with Lord Ram to the forest also. And then when they go into the forest, there is a very nice description that when Lord Ram goes to this hermitage of this person called Guha. Now Guha is essentially a tribal man. He's a leader of a tribe called the Nishadas. So he goes there, and Lord Ram essentially is a prince. So he's used to sleeping on, and he's used to the comforts. He's used to sleeping on a bed. He's not used to any of these hardships. So then at that time, Lakshmana is the one who goes and he prepares a nice bed with straw, etc. And then he makes sure that Lord Ram and Sita, they have a comfortable night while they're sleeping. But Lakshmana could see that Lord Ram is not able to sleep at night because his back was hurting while sleeping on the ground. Now this is again very, very bewildering to all of us, because Krishna or Lord Ram is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the one who permeates everything. He is there in every single atom. He is the one who gives existence to all of these atoms. He is the one who's present as time personified in this whole material universe. But still, somehow or the other, he is feeling distress while sleeping on the ground. Like, this aspect of the Lord is very, very bewildering to most people. They cannot understand how the Lord was also being distressed there. Now, one argument that many people give is like, they say that, well, this is all part of his Leela, or they say that this is all just part of performing a pastime. He's just performing a pastime there. But actually, we can't just accept that explanation either, because in the Srimad Bhagavatam it is said that Damna Swena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi, which means that everything he says, every action that he performs is 100% true. It's not that he can just say something, or it's not that he can just do something without there being any real existence behind it. So actually everything that he does and everything that he says is ultimately true. But still we see that in Krishna Leela he lies. So how is that possible? That's the fact that bewilders most people. Like, everything he does is true. It's not that he's just acting. And so it's not that he was just acting when he was laying down on the ground and his back was hurting. It must have really been hurting. But how is it possible for the Supreme Lord's back to hurt? That's something that's beyond comprehension. So Lakshmana could see all of that, and he could not sleep the whole night. And he was also bewildered. Not for exactly the same reason, but essentially for the fact that how is it possible that my brother, who is meant to be coronated as the king, is being exiled and being turned away to the forest? So he could not sleep that night. Then when they go into the forest, Lord Ram essentially surveys the whole area in this region called Panchavati. So he surveys the whole area, and then he decides that a hut needs to be made where they can live for 14 years. So at that time he tells Lakshmana, he says, "Oh Lakshmana, I want you to build a hut in this region," for example. At that point it's described that Lakshmana actually becomes very distressed. And Lord Ram asks, why is Lakshmana crying? He's like, why are you crying? He says, "Oh my Lord, actually I should have known your desire, the desire in your heart, without you having to express it." He says, an expert servant is one who knows the mind of the master, even though the master may not say it out loud. He says, the fact that you had to tell me that this is where you want the hut and this is how you want the hut is quite distressing, because it means that I have not been serving you properly and I don't know your mind very well. So then Lord Ram became very ecstatic at how Lakshman was such a dear servant to him, and then he embraced him. Essentially, we see throughout the Ram Leela that there is this description of Lakshman never leaving the side of Lord Ram. Did Rama and Lakshman fight? Yeah, they did fight. But the fight was essentially for serving each other. Like, for example, we see that the one example I've already given you is where Lord Ram did not want Lakshman to come with him to the forest. But Lakshman essentially fought and said that, I'll kill my father, I'll kill my mother, I'll kill everyone. I'll kill Bharata as well. I'll kill my own brother, Bharata, if I want to come to the forest. And then he essentially decided that, well, I will come. So he fought with Lord Ram and convinced him that he's going to come. Then later on in the Ramayana, we see that at one point Lord Ram becomes very distressed. Actually, he becomes so distressed that he starts crying in the forest. And why is he crying? He says that, I have left my whole family, I've left my mother in the hands of that cruel Kekai. Kekai obviously was the younger queen. He says that I've left my mother alone. There's no one to look after her. So he looks to Lakshmana and he says that, "Oh Lakshmana, I really think you should go back, because I don't think my mother will survive without me. And I've also heard the fact that my father, Dashratha, has passed away. So he says that, you really should go back." So then at that point, Lakshmana immediately changes gears. Like Lakshmana, up until this point, he was saying that I'm going to kill Bharata, I'm going to kill Kekai, etc. But then he immediately changes gears. And you know what he says? He says that actually Bharata is a very, very respectable person. Bharata will never let any harm come upon your mother. And Kekai will also look after your mother. He immediately changes gears. Up until this point, he was completely he was completely blasting his brother and his mother, Kekai. But as soon as he saw Ram under distress, he completely changes gears. So this is again a very good example of how a servant knows how to comfort his master. And he knows the right things to say, he knows the right mood to express to the Lord at the right time also. He knows how to be the perfect servant of Krishna. Like, for example, it's described that in Vaikuntha also, when Lord Vishnu is laying down on his, essentially his celestial serpent, which is Anantasesha. I'm sure many of you would have seen the pictures of Lord Narayan on Anantasesha. At that time, it's described that he is called Anantasesha because he can complete the Lord's will. Sesha means to complete. So he says he can complete the Lord's will. And the way he does it is when the Lord wants to sleep, he becomes like a bed. When the Lord wants to look at his devotees, he essentially opens his eyes. He has 1,000 hoods in the form of a snake. So he has 1,000 hoods and he has those many eyes, or double the number of eyes. And each of those eyes is like a shining diamond. So whenever he wants, or whenever the Lord wants to see something, he opens his eyes. And from the luster of his lights, the Lord is able to see everything. Then when the Lord wants to, when the Lord is feeling warm, or when the Lord is feeling a bit tired, he opens his mouth and he fans the Lord with his tongues. Because, like, as you have seen, the tongue of a snake is bifid. So it's essentially divided into two parts. So when he fans the Lord with his tongue, it creates an immense amount of breeze, which is able to cool the Lord also. And then when the Lord wants to walk somewhere, this snake himself, he becomes the slippers of the Lord also. He becomes the padukas of the Lord, so that the Lord can travel to different places. And it's described that when the Lord wants to sleep, at that time the snake puffs up a portion of his body so that the Lord can use his body as a pillow. So in this way, Anantasesha essentially serves the Lord in all different capacities. So he knows the mood of the Lord and he knows how to serve the Lord. And the way he knows the mood of the Lord is, firstly, because he is also the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but in the mood of service. But occasionally he displays his opulence also, which is also just as nectarian. So listening to Balram Katha and listening to Krishna Katha, Srila Prabhupada said, is pretty much non-different. It's one and the same. And we see that when, again, when Lord Ram goes into the forest, there's another incident which happens, which is again quite distressing, which is when Sita is kidnapped. When Sita is kidnapped, Lord Ram blasts Lakshmana like anything, because Lord Ram had left Sita in the care of Lakshmana at that time. Because, there, as you all know, there was a golden deer which Lord Ram was chasing. And then when he was chasing that deer, he ran away and Sita was left unprotected. And at that time, Ravana came in the disguise of a sannyasi and he took Mother Sita away. So at that time, Sita had said some harsh words because she wanted Lakshmana to go away. So Lakshmana could not bear those harsh words, and then he left the place immediately. And when he left that place, obviously Sita got kidnapped. And when Lord Ram saw that Lakshmana had come out of the hermitage, Lord Ram became very angry at Lakshmana and he said, "How dare you leave Sita alone?" He says, "I left you in care. I left Sita in your care. So you should not have left Sita alone." So at that point, Lakshmana says, "Well, Sita was speaking very harsh words to me." And then he said, "Well, it doesn't matter. She was distressed. She was saying all kinds of things. You should have had the higher intelligence to have stood around and from a distance and observed her, because now I don't know what's going to happen to Sita." And pretty much, nonetheless, when they go back and they see that, when they go back to the hermitage, they see that Sita essentially has been kidnapped by Ravana. And then Ram becomes very distressed. So then again, like, it's not that Lakshmana took that to heart, because he knew that Ram was very distressed and that's why he spoke harsh words. So Lakshmana heard harsh words from Sita and he heard harsh words from Rama. But still he did not abandon their service. And this is highlighted by Yamunacharya in his Stotra Ratna, where he says that, sometimes a mother may be very angry with an infant and she may push that infant away. But he says that the infant will still nonetheless go back to her mother, or will go back to his mother, because the infant knows no other shelter. It only knows the mother as the shelter. So he says that similarly, Yamunacharya prays that may I also always be like this, where even if Krishna, or even if Lord Ram pushes me away from him, I will still come back only to Lord Ram, because he is my only shelter. Krishna is my only shelter. I cannot think of any other shelter apart from him. So this is the mood of Lakshmana. That is how Lakshmana was acting. So even though Lord Ram and Lord Mother Sita essentially blasted him and criticized him still, and spoke very, very harsh words to him, even questioning his character, still he did not abandon the service of Lord Ram and Mother Sita. Then we see that when they go into the forest, then at that time there is the interesting description of how Lord Ram meets this monkey king known as Sugriva. And essentially Sugriva has lost his wife and Lord Rama has also lost his wife. And then they both make a pact in front of the fire. They make a promise that Lord Ram says, I will help you rescue your wife, and Sugriva says that I will help you rescue your wife. So they make this pact of friendship in front of the fire. Now essentially we see that Lord Ram fulfills his side of the promise. He helps Sugriva rescue his wife, Ruma, from the clutches of Vali, who was none other than his own brother. But then what happens is that when it's Sugriva's time to fulfill his side of the promise, Chaturmasya starts. And then it's decided that, well, in Chaturmasya, no auspicious activity can begin. So essentially I cannot go and we cannot start this expedition of trying to look for Mother Sita. So they say that we have to wait for 4 months. And during these 4 months, Sugriva becomes very engrossed in sense gratification. He's drinking alcohol, he's eating meat, and he's enjoying with his wives and stuff. And ultimately he forgets about the Lord. He forgets about his promise. Just as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Bhogeshwarya prasaktanam taya pahrita chetasam vyavasayatmika buddhi samadho na vidhiyate. Which means that when one becomes too attached to material opulence and when one becomes too attached to sense gratification, one forgets his resolution to serve the Lord. And this is exactly what happened with Sugriva. So even though Rama had fulfilled his side of the promise, Sugriva forgot his side of the promise. At that point, Lakshmana becomes very angry because on one hand, he's seeing that his brother, Lord Ram, is suffering in great distress. Like it's described that Lord Ram was not looking after his hair. His hair, he had insects crawling in his hair. His skin was very dry because he was not bathing. His clothes were completely torn because he was not looking after his clothes. He had become very weak also because he was not eating. All because he was feeling distress from being separated from Sita. So Lakshmana could not tolerate. These 4 months were complete torture for Lakshmana when he was seeing his brother in such distress. And then when he realized that Chaturmasya has finished and Sugriva has not come with his army, he became even more distressed. He became not just distressed, he became very angry. So with his bow and arrow, he started marching into the kingdom of Kishkinda. And when he marched there, essentially he went straight to the palace of Sugriva. Now all the monkeys who were seeing this ferocious form of the Lord as Lakshmana, they became very scared also. And they eventually sent the message to Sugriva that, Lakshman is coming, be ready. So Sugriva immediately, he comes to his senses and he realizes, oh no, I forgot that I was meant to fulfill my side of the promise. And then when he realizes that Lakshmana is coming for his head, essentially Lakshmana was coming to kill him, he sends his wife Tara. He says, you go and pacify Lakshmana because I don't have the audacity to face him. So then Tara comes and she calms Lakshman down a little bit. And then Sugriva comes and he falls at Lakshmana's feet and he says, I forgot about my promise and that's my fault. He says, but please forgive me, I will act on my promise now straight away. So then he calls for the whole army and stuff, etc. So then essentially the interesting thing is that when Lakshmana goes back to Lord Ram, Lakshmana does not tell Lord Ram that Sugriva forgot his promise. Lakshmana says, here is Sugriva and here is how he has fulfilled his promise. He has bought the whole army. And Lord Ram looks at Sugriva and he looks at Lakshmana and he smiles. Now essentially that's all is described in the Ramayana. That's all is described. You don't hear anymore. But actually if you read the commentary to Ramayana, it's actually described that this is actually a very, very significant event. Because what this describes is Lakshmana or Balram essentially is Guru Tattva. So when the Guru Tattva presents a disciple to the Guru, one of the aspects of this relationship is that the Guru removes the sins or removes the faults of the disciple. Now this may be through chastising, maybe through following the principles as they are verbatim. But either way, the task of the Guru is not to go in front of the Lord and point out the defects of the disciple. The task of the Guru is that the Guru has to somehow or the other make the disciple ready and make him presentable in front of Krishna. So when we, essentially you can think about this, when we essentially become eligible to be presented to Krishna, The Guru Tattva will not say, oh yeah, this guy was a complete rascal and then I made him perfect. No, that's not what Guru Tattva will do. Guru Tattva will essentially take a perfected disciple and present it to Krishna and say, here is your eternal servant ready to serve you again. So this is how merciful the Guru Tattva is. So essentially this is shown through this pastime of Lakshmana and Lord Ram also. Then we see that in the pastimes of Lord Ram again, like there was another very distressful event which happened in the life of Lakshmana, after which Lakshmana decided that he's never going to come back as the younger brother of Lord Ram. And this incident, it happened twice, and that was when Lord Ram, essentially, externally, he became angry with Mother Sita. So firstly, after the whole battle is finished, Ravana is killed. At that time, Lord Ram asks Vibhishana and all the other kings and Hanuman to bring Sita in a palanquin. And when Sita arrives in the palanquin in front of the whole army, essentially, and in front of Lord Ram says, well, you're free to go anywhere. I cannot accept you because you've stayed in the house of another man. And if I accept you, then essentially I will be breaking the rules of dharma and I won't be able to rule over the kingdom. So essentially I have to banish you. You can go wherever you want. So then Sita says, well, I cannot tolerate these harsh words coming from the mouth of Rama. So she says that, well, it's better that I burn up in fire. So she looks at Lakshmana and she says, oh, Lakshmana, please bring some wood which I can burn and I can jump into that fire. So Lakshmana is becoming very distressed because how can he allow his mother, Sita, to jump into the fire? But then at that time, Lord Ram, he says, yeah, Lakshmana, you heard your mother. You heard what she said. You have to follow her order. Go and bring wood. So at that time, Lakshmana is like burning with rage because he's burning with rage at his own brother. But he can't do anything because he's the younger brother. So he has to obey his brother's instructions. So then he essentially, very reluctantly, he builds a fire in which Mother Sita essentially, or at least we understand the shadow of Sita jumped into, and the real Sita comes out of that. And then the second event is obviously when Sita gets banished again in the Uttarakanda. Later, when Lord Ram hears some rumors about people not trusting his rule, at that time we see that Lakshmana is the one who's ordered to go and drop Sita off into the forest at the sage of Valmiki. So again, Lakshmana decided that he's never going to come back as the younger brother. So that's why we see in the next pastime when Lord Krishna appeared, at that time Balaram appeared as the elder brother. And interestingly enough, there's one very interesting pastime which happened there also, which is that one day all the cowherd boys, including Lord Balaram, they go up to Mother Yashoda and they say that, Balaram has swallowed some dirt. Oh, sorry, Krishna has swallowed some dirt. Now, interestingly enough, Krishna says straight away that they are all lying. All the cowherd boys are lying. Then Mother Yashoda says, well, what about Balaram? Balaram is elder brother. He says, yeah, Balaram is also lying. Now, this is quite interesting. This bewilders minds of many people. The absolute truth, who is none other than Krishna, the absolute truth, who is Balaram, one of them is lying. How is it possible that they're lying? Everything they say is ultimately the truth. So did Krishna actually eat dirt? Did he not eat dirt? Actually, this topic is not discussed in Srimad Bhagavatam. We don't actually never find out whether Krishna actually ate dirt or not. Because it's too difficult for us to understand. Did he actually eat dirt or did he not? Because as I mentioned before, we can say that this is all just part of a pastime. But then we are saying that these pastimes are not true. Essentially what Krishna is saying, Krishna can also lie. But we know that Krishna can never lie. Like for example, there is that event, that pastime of Krishna also saying that, the gopis want to cross the Yamuna, and then at that time Krishna says that go and tell the Yamuna that I am the eternal brahmachari and that I never lie. And if the words I'm saying are true, Yamuna will make a bridge over you. And the gopis say that, and essentially Yamuna allows the gopis to cross over herself. So the gopis are themselves bewildered. How is it possible that Krishna is a brahmachari when he engages in the Rasa Leela? How is it possible that Krishna always speaks the truth when we know he speaks at least 10 different lies every day? Now this is very bewildering for all of us to understand. Like, how is it possible that the absolute truth speaks lies? Now, that is why some of these things are beyond our understanding. And that is why it's said that Ananta Sesha, or the Lord in the form of Sesha, he glorifies the Lord for, he essentially points out how bewildering it is to understand the true nature of the Lord. Then, interestingly enough, this relationship between Krishna and Balaram is also further, you can see the strain is always there. Like Krishna and Balaram, like Balaram is always trying to serve Krishna, but he's also acting in the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we see this particularly when, like Krishna is married to Rukmini. At that time, essentially what happens is Krishna's son, Pradyumna, and his son, Aniruddha, they also want to marry Rukmi's daughter and granddaughter, essentially. But Rukmi is a sworn enemy of Krishna because Rukmi wanted his sister Rukmini to marry Shishupal. But Krishna came and abducted Rukmini and took her away and married her as instead. So at that time, Rukmi became very, very angry at Lord Krishna. But Krishna had some obligations. He, at one point, essentially, Rukmi is chasing. So when Krishna essentially kidnaps Rukmini and takes her on a chariot, at that time, Rukmi is chasing Lord Krishna on his chariot. So Lord Krishna has enough. He stops and he catches Rukmi, defeats him. They have a small battle. Krishna defeats him. And then he's thinking what to do because on one hand, he wants to kill Rukmi, but he can't kill Rukmi because otherwise Rukmini, his wife, will get distressed that why are you killing my brother? So what he does is he shaves off his mustache and like half of his mustache and then sends him away. But then we see that later when Krishna's son and grandson, who are Aniruddha and Pradyumna, they want to marry Rukmi's daughter and granddaughter. At that time we see that they have this event which they hold in their kingdom. And Lord Balaram is playing dice with these people. So he's playing dice with Rukmi, with Kalinga, and there's a few other kings, etc., who are playing dice there. So then at that time, Balaram becomes very angry because these people are cheating. They're not playing dice properly. And then at that time, the king of Kalinga, he says, and Rukmi says that, you are just cowherd boys. You don't know anything about dice, etc. You guys don't know anything. We are the real experts. And then they were just speaking harsh words to Balaram. And then Balaram gets really angry. He takes his club and he smashes the head of Rukmi. Literally just kills him on the spot. And then this Kalinga, who was laughing at Lord Balaram, he punches him in the face and essentially like removes all of his teeth. So at that time, it's described that Krishna was very silent. He didn't know what to say. On one hand, he was happy that Rukmi was killed. But on the other hand, he didn't want to express his unhappiness because, he didn't want to express his happiness because otherwise Rukmini would become distressed. So essentially, you could see that there was some strain between Krishna and Balaram. But ultimately, all of that strain was meant to increase the transcendental pleasure of Krishna. And similarly, when we come back to the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, we see the same thing. Like there is always some strain. Like for example, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he goes into the Ganga to take a bath, at that time Nityananda Prabhu, he takes the staff of the sannyasa staff of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and breaks it and throws it into the river. And he says that, you are not a sannyasi. You don't need to hold on to a sannyasi rod. Then at that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu becomes very angry and he chastises Nityananda that, you are an avaduta, you have no idea about social conventions, etc., like blasts him. And then he says, okay, well, I don't want to see you anymore. You go back to Bengal and you preach there. I don't want to see you in Puri anymore. So then at that time, Balaram also becomes distressed. He says, Nityananda Prabhu becomes distressed. Like, how can I stay away from you? It's not possible. And he says, no, don't ever come to see me. And then Nityananda Prabhu says, no, well, I will come to see you once every year. So this relationship between Krishna and Balaram is very transcendental. Krishna, Balaram, Ananta Sesha and the Lord, Lakshmana and Lord Rama. It's very transcendental and it's definitely a subject that is worthy of discussion. And we can discuss about the relationship between Lord Ram and Lakshmana, Lord Krishna and Balaram for a long time, but I think our time is coming to an end, so we will have to stop there. If anyone has any questions, anything you'd like to share, any comments, any criticisms, we can take that now. Yes, Mataji?
We often hear within the yoga path and bhakti yoga, the ahimsa principle is very, very important. But then we see in Krishna's pastimes that there is a lot of, even for kids sometimes to read the Krishna book, there is a lot of violence there. So how do you explain this to people who studying yoga, they have a lot of emphasis into ahimsa, that God himself is getting involved into a lot of violent pastimes. And
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So essentially it's described that, so the question is that, like we stress on the fact that ahimsa or non-violence is very important. But then we see that in Krishna's Leela, there is a lot of violence also. Now, the thing is to understand, so firstly, like to address the issue of the modern day society, well, in Kali Yuga, any kind of violence is prohibited. In fact, Lord Chaitanya himself did not demonstrate any violence. So in Kali Yuga, we are not meant to demonstrate any violence. So if we are meant to follow an example of someone, we follow the example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and not go back to the previous ages. Because in the previous ages, the Lord comes to perform his pastimes. He says in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge, which means that he comes millennium after millennium to destroy the miscreants and also to establish the principles of religion. So from Krishna's perspective, what we see as violence is not really violence. Because from Krishna's perspective, what he is seeing, what we are seeing is that, oh, there's a person that's being killed and he's suffering and then ultimately he's going to die. That's what we are seeing. But actually, if we look at it from Krishna's perspective is dehinosmin yatha dehe komaram jovanam jara. So whenever he kills a living entity or he kills someone, he's essentially transferring them into a new body. Maybe he's transferring them to the spiritual world, or maybe he's giving them impersonal liberation. So from the perspective of Krishna's broad vision, he's not really seeing this as violence as such. Because it's described in Chaitanya Chandramrita, it's said that Krishna's hand is one of complete mercy. So sometimes we see that some people may only get mercy in the form of violence. Now it sounds harsh, but it is a reality. Like for example, like if there is a criminal cannot be dealt in the same way as a normal citizen of this country. A normal citizen of this country who's obeying the laws receives different kind of treatment versus one who is disobeying the laws. Like for example, it is also described that to allow evil to perpetuate is also a form of violence. So when there are lots of demons who are harming other devotees, who are harming other living entities, it is necessary to kill them. It's not that Krishna is going on a killing spree, like, okay, I just want to kill all these people because I want to have fun. He's killing all of these people because they were essentially disobeying the laws of dharma and they were misusing them to harm other people. So one of the principles of dharma is that if a person is going to harm someone else, you have to stop him by some means. And in some cases, the death penalty or essentially killing that person may be necessary to stop that person from harming other people. So in the broader perspective, it's not really seen as violence. Or if you look at it from the utilitarian perspective, like nowadays we have this utilitarianism also. If we look at it from the utilitarian perspective also, we can see that sometimes, like I don't know if you've heard about the example, you might have heard of that example, that there's a train coming and then you can change the path. It can either hit one person or it can hit 5 people. Which one would you prefer the train to hit? So we would obviously divert it to hitting the one person if you can. Yeah, that's the common understanding that of utilitarianism. And similarly, it's in the case of Krishna's pastimes also, that whenever Krishna has to kill someone, he only kills them if it's absolutely necessary, and he kills them because these people are otherwise going to harm other people. So in that case, it may be necessary. So in a brief way, I think that's how I would answer that. I hope that kind of addresses that question. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mataji. Any other comments, questions, anything anyone wants to share? We will finish there then. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.